They say families fall apart slowly, a comment here, a forgotten birthday there, until one day you ask a question so simple it shatters everything that held you together. For me, that question came on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I was 29, standing in my parents' kitchen holding a store-bought pumpkin pie I'd picked up on my way from the restaurant. The air hung heavy with cinnamon, thick with my father's recent triumph. My father was bragging to my brother about some golf tournament he'd been invited to. My mother laughed too loudly, and I, the daughter they loved to overlook, asked, "So, when are we celebrating Thanksgiving this year?" Dad looked up from carving his roast beef, that half smirk on his face that always carried more judgment than joy. "Oh, honey," he said, the knife still in his hand. "We already did it. Yesterday. The owner gave us the VIP table at the new restaurant downtown. Said it was for important people." Important people. I remember blinking, thinking I must have misheard him. Yesterday I asked, laughing awkwardly, glancing at my mother for confirmation. "But Thanksgiving's tomorrow." Mom avoided my eyes. "It was just a small thing, Claire. We didn't think you'd mind. You're always working this time of year anyway." I stood there gripping that cold pie so tightly the plastic cover cracked. "You had Thanksgiving without me." Dad shrugged as if I'd asked whether they'd run out of gravy. The owner offered the table, "Sweetheart. You can't say no to that." Besides, he chuckled, tapping the knife on the counter. "Those tables aren't for just anyone. They're for people who matter. People who matter." The words echoed in the quiet that followed, bouncing off every spotless countertop, every perfect dish my mother had just washed. I felt something tighten in my chest, a heat rising that wasn't anger yet, not quite. It was disbelief, the kind that starts low like a hum in your ears, before it grows into something you can't silence. I looked at my brother Evan sitting there with that familiar smugness that came from never having to earn anything. He avoided eye contact, stirring his coffee, like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. "Dad," I said slowly, "you do know I own that restaurant, right?" The knife froze mid-air. Dad laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, come on, Claire. Don't start that again. You manage a kitchen. You cook. But the owner, he's a friend of mine. Good man. Runs the place like clockwork." That was when it hit me they'd eaten at my restaurant. My name on the license, my recipes, my staff served them, and they didn't even realize whose table they sat at. I wanted to say it then. I wanted to tell them I was the owner, the founder, the reason they'd even had that damn VIP table in the first place. But when my mother reached over and touched my father's wrist, murmuring, "Let's not fight," something inside me broke, not loudly but cleanly, like glass under snow. So I smiled. The kind of smile that feels like pressing your hand against a wound. "You're right, Dad," I said softly. "It's not for just anyone." He grinned, proud of himself, like he'd just taught me something valuable. "Now you get it," he said, wiping his hands on a linen towel. "One day, you'll learn how the world works. One day." That night I went back to the restaurant long after the lights had gone out. The city was quiet, streets held their breath, the November sky leaking only a thin, cold light onto the asphalt. Inside, everything still smelled like rosemary butter and the faint sweetness of apple pie. My signature dessert, the same one they'd probably eaten yesterday. I sat in the corner booth by the fireplace, the one my family had sat at, and stared at the empty wine glasses left from earlier service. Ryan, my manager, popped his head from the kitchen. "Claire, you're still here?" I nodded. "Just locking up." He walked over, wiping his hands on his apron. "You okay?" I looked at the table. Their table, the candle still melted halfway down. "My family had dinner here yesterday," I said quietly. Ryan frowned. "Yesterday? But we were closed for private reservations." "Yeah," I whispered, a bitter laugh slipping out. "I know." He tilted his head. "You want me to check the list?" "No need," I said. "I already know which name it's under." For a moment we both stood there in silence, the hum of the refrigerator filling the air. I reached for the reservation book and flipped through until I found it there. It was in bold ink, "Martin Sutton VIP table for 4. My father's handwriting. His signature. My restaurant. I ran my thumb over the page, feeling the indentation his pen had left the same pen he probably used to sign birthday cards I never got. Ryan broke the silence. "You want me to do something about it?" I looked up at him. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice calm, almost detached. "Tomorrow morning, cancel all the free VIP passes for the Sutton family." He hesitated. All of them, I said, closing the book. "If they want a table next time, they can call the owner directly." He nodded slowly, understanding more than I said. "Got it." After he left, I stayed a while longer, tracing the edge of the table with my fingertips. The wood was smooth polished, not a single scratch. I'd saved for 2 years to buy that wood, handpicked it from a craftsman upstate. Every detail of this place, the light fixtures, the menu fonts, the music was mine. My blood, my sweat, my sleepless nights. And my father had sat here bragging to the staff about knowing the owner. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, soundless, relentless. I watched it gather on the windowsill, each flake dissolving into the next until everything blurred into white. I thought of his words again, important people. I didn't feel important. I felt invisible. But somewhere beneath the ache, beneath the sting of being dismissed yet again, something steadier began to rise. Not rage, not anymore. It was colder, cleaner. A kind of certainty that forms when there's nothing left to prove, only something left to build. I stood, grabbed my coat, and whispered to the empty room, "One day you'll learn how the world works." The lights hummed low as I locked the door behind me. The snow outside had thickened, quieting the city into stillness. I glanced back once through the glass at the sign above the entrance, gold letters catching the faint glow of a street lamp, Cedar and Thyme, owned and operated by Claire Sutton. They'd sat beneath that sign and never noticed. Tomorrow they would. The restaurant smelled like cinnamon and coffee the next morning when I walked in. The first snow of November had hardened overnight, coating the street outside in a thin sheet of glass. Ryan was already behind the counter adjusting the chalkboard menu. He didn't look up when he said, "I did what you asked. The Suttons are off the list." I hung my coat, brushed the cold from my sleeves. "Good," I said. He turned, then studying me for a moment. "You sure about this, Claire? I mean, I know what happened was wrong, but..." I smiled without warmth. "I'm sure. They'll understand eventually." I didn't believe that, of course. My father had never understood anything that didn't center around him. But this wasn't about teaching him a lesson. It was about reclaiming the space he'd walk through as if it were his. The lunch rush came slowly. The kind that lets you hear every sound, the hiss of the espresso machine, the scrape of chairs, the steady rhythm of knives against plates. I liked mornings like this. They gave me time to breathe, to remember why I'd built this place in the first place. At 11, the door opened. A woman in her 60s stepped in, brushing snow from her shoulders. "Are you open?" she asked, her voice careful. "Always," I said, gesturing toward a window table. "Sit wherever you like." She smiled. "It's warm here. The world outside feels colder this year." I poured her coffee myself, then left her to read her newspaper. Moments like that, the quiet gratitude of strangers, had kept me alive through the years when no one believed I could do this. By noon, the bell above the door rang again. I didn't have to look up to know who it was. Claire, my brother's voice, came with that familiar mix of charm and tension. "Evan." "Of course." I exhaled softly before turning. "Evan, to what do I owe the pleasure?" He walked up, hands buried in his jacket pockets. "Dad told me you were mad about the dinner thing. Thought I'd smooth it over before Thanksgiving actually hits." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the dinner where you all celebrated a holiday without me?" He winced, giving a half laugh. "It wasn't like that. The owner offered a free table and Dad didn't want to waste it. You know how he gets it." "Oh, I know exactly how he gets it." Evan leaned against the counter, lowering his voice. "Look, he just doesn't get it. You could explain, though. Tell him you're doing well. Maybe he'll stop talking like I'm still 12. I finished for him. He sighed. "Yeah, something like that." I wiped a spot on the counter, slow and deliberate. "You had dinner here, Evan." "In my restaurant. Did it ever occur to you to tell him whose name is on the deed?" He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. "I didn't want to start something," he said. You mean you didn't want to lose your free meal? His expression tightened. You're overreacting. I leaned in slightly. Overreacting is what women get accused of when they stop staying quiet. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he muttered, "Oh, you know, Dad. He says a woman's pride is like an anchor, it only keeps you still." I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. Funny. I think silence is worse. Before he could answer, Ryan appeared beside me, a quiet wall between us. We're a little busy, Evan. If you'd like to eat, I can get you a table. Evan stared at me for a long moment before shaking his head. You've changed, Claire. I met his gaze. That's the idea. He left without ordering. The bell over the door jingled once, and then it was quiet again. The rest of the day blurred into motion orders, deliveries, laughter, the small symphony of work that always soothed me. But beneath it all, there was a hum, a steady undercurrent of something shifting. That night after we closed, Ryan poured us both a glass of wine. You ever wonder, he said, why their approval still matters to you? I held the glass, the deep red wine, cool against my palm. It doesn't, I said. Then softer. Not as much as it used to. He studied me, and I could tell he didn't believe me. Maybe because I didn't either. I stayed late again. It has become a habit. The quiet after hours felt safer than any home I'd ever known. I walked from table to table, straightening menus, checking the folds in the napkins. When I reached the corner booth, their booth, I stopped. For a moment, I could almost see them there again. My father's booming laugh, my mother's polite smile, Evan checking his phone under the table. The ghosts of a family that had mistaken status for love. I sat down slowly, resting my hands flat on the table. The wood was cool beneath my palms. This was supposed to bring us together, I said aloud to no one. It just reminded me how far apart we already were. The snow outside thickened the flakes drifting past the window in lazy spirals. The city glowed faintly in the distance. Cars neon, the heartbeat of a world that didn't care who you were, only what you made of it. And I thought about what my father had said. You'll learn how the world works. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was my lesson. That the world doesn't hand you belonging, you build it. Brick by brick, table by table, meal by meal. I took out my phone, opened the restaurant's social page, and typed, "Thanksgiving special open to everyone. No reservations needed. All are welcome." Ryan texted back 2 minutes later. You sure that's going to be chaos? I smiled to myself. Exactly. Because maybe this was how you fix the kind of wound my family left, not by closing the door, but by opening it wider. I stood up, turning off the last light, the restaurant sinking into darkness, except for the faint golden glow spilling from the street outside. I looked back once more at that empty corner booth. Tomorrow it will be full again, not with my family, but with strangers who might actually see me. And maybe that was enough. As I stepped out into the cold, I whispered the words that had been sitting at the edge of my tongue since last night, words not of anger but of resolve. Important people, I murmured. Let's see who they really are. The snow crunched beneath my boots. Behind me, Cedar and Thyme stood quiet and waiting a place reborn its tables ready for anyone who needed a seat. Before the success, before the family drama, there was only the cold and the silence of the first weeks. I could still see my mother's hands steady and sure pressing the dough into the pan, whispering, "The secret is patience, sweetheart. Never rush sweetness." Back then I thought she was talking about baking. Now I knew she meant everything. That morning I stood alone in my own kitchen, smaller, quieter, but mine rolling out dough on a scarred wooden counter I'd bought secondhand from a closed diner. Outside Asheville was waking up to another cold morning, the kind where the sky looks like smoke and the air bites just enough to keep you humble. This was the third week after I'd opened Cedar and Thyme. The oven door squeaked, the coffee machine sputtered, and the register light flickered like it was deciding whether it wanted to keep going. Sometimes I felt the same. "Gas line's still acting up," Ryan said, stepping in with his jacket half-zipped, rubbing his hands for warmth. I called the plumber again, but he said it's going to take a few days. Then we'll make do, I said, spreading flour on the counter. It's what we do best. He grinned faintly. You sound like your mom. I froze for just a second. That name still had a way of pulling the air out of me. Yeah, I said softly, shaping the crust. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. The first pie I baked in this kitchen wasn't perfect. The crust cracked at the edges and I used too much nutmeg. But when it came out of the oven, golden and bubbling at the seams, I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever made. We didn't have customers yet, just 2 construction workers who stopped for coffee every morning and a college student who sat by the window writing in a notebook and ordering nothing but tea. I sliced the pie into 6 pieces and carried 2 to the men at the counter. On the house, I said. They exchanged a quick, disbelieving look before the larger man snatched the plate. For real, one asked. For real, I said, smiling. Tell people it's good if it is. Lie if it's not. They laughed, took a bite, and one of them said with his mouth full, This is like Thanksgiving on a plate. I didn't say it out loud, but the words hit something deep. That night after we closed, I sat at one of the corner tables counting bills. The total barely covered the morning's espresso beans, but I didn't care. There was a pie cooling on the counter, the smell filling the room like hope. Ryan poured 2 glasses of cheap wine and joined me. We'll get there, he said. You've done harder things. Like what? Surviving your family, he said, half joking, half serious. I laughed, the sound strange in the empty space. Yeah, guess I have. He leaned back. Have you ever missed them? I stared at the window where our reflection glowed against the dark. Sometimes, I admitted. But not the way they were. I miss what I thought they could be. The next day the blogger came in. I didn't know it then, but that man with the camera and the shy smile would change everything. He ordered an apple pie and a black coffee. Didn't say much, just took photos of the pie, the counter, the empty tables. When he left, he tipped $10 on a $7 bill. 2 days later, Ryan's voice hit the kitchen like a bell, his face bathed in the frantic blue light of his phone screen. Claire, you need to see this. On the screen was a video titled, Hidden Gem in Asheville Cedar and Thyme. There it was, my pie steaming in the golden light, Ryan pouring coffee, me laughing awkwardly when the blogger asked for my name. The comment section was full of strangers saying things like, This place feels like home. You can smell the cinnamon through the screen. Going this weekend. By Saturday, the line stretched out the door. I stood behind the counter, stunned, barely able to keep up. Ryan was laughing, shouting orders over the crowd. 2 pumpkin soups, 3 apple pies. Claire, you've started a war out there, but all I could think about was my mother, how she used to hum while she baked, how her hands never trembled, even when her world did. At closing, we were out of everything. Flour, butter, even napkins. I sat on the floor in the kitchen, exhausted, my apron dusted white. Ryan handed me a note from one of the customers. It read, This pie tastes like love. Don't ever change. I pressed the note between my palms like a prayer. When I got home that night, my phone buzzed, a text from my father. I hadn't heard from him in months. Dad saw your little restaurant video. Didn't know people film things like that now. Don't let it distract you from finding a real career. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I set the phone down, washed my hands, and started kneading dough for tomorrow's batch. By midnight, the kitchen smelled like apples again. There was something healing about that smell, something that reminded me that maybe in some quiet corner of the world, sweetness still belonged to those who didn't rush it. I opened the window, let the cold air in, and whispered to the empty room, You were wrong, Dad. This is a real career. The city outside was silent, except for the wind. I closed my eyes, breathed in the cinnamon, and let myself believe for the first time that I was building something that could last. Not a restaurant, not even a business, a legacy. The night the fryer exploded the sky outside was a sickly, bruised orange. We'd just finished the dinner rush, a record-breaking one thanks to that viral video, and my forearms ached and my gloves were slick with 4-hour-old chicken grease when I heard the sound. A sharp pop followed by the low hiss of flame catching grease. Claire Ryan's voice cut through the clatter backline. I turned, and in that instant everything slowed. The glow, the heat, the panic. The corner of the kitchen was alive with fire licking up the wall like it had been waiting its turn. Ryan grabbed the extinguisher, shouting for the staff to get out. I reached for the emergency shutoff, my fingers slick from soap. For a second, I saw the whole dream, the wood, the light, the recipes. Every sleepless night all burning right in front of me. But I didn't freeze. I couldn't. We got it under control before the fire department even arrived. By then the smell of smoke had woven itself into everything, the curtains, the walls, the air. My hands were trembling, but my voice wasn't when I told the inspector, "We'll rebuild. It's just a setback." He looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was. That night when the last firefighter left Ryan and I stood in the middle of the kitchen. The counters were blackened, the tiles cracked. The ovens were ruined. I was covered in soot, my apron singed at the edge. Ryan exhaled low and heavy. "Insurance will cover some of it," he said. I nodded, but my mind was already racing past the paperwork, past the damage to the phone call I knew was coming. It came at 9 the next morning. "Claire," my father's voice sharp and certain. I saw the news. "Fire in your little place, huh?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone flat. "Well," he continued, "I hope this teaches you something. Businesses are fragile. Maybe it's time to think about something more stable. You could come work for Evan. He's managing a marketing team now." I bit back the bitterness rising in my throat. "Thanks, Dad, but I'll be fine." "Fine," he scoffed. "You almost burned the whole thing down. You've always been too stubborn for your own good." I learned from the best, I said, and hung up. The silence that followed was a vacuum pulling the heat right out of my chest. I stared at the soot on my hands. I stood in the middle of that half-burned kitchen and let the tears come, not because I'd lost something, but because I'd realized I'd never had his belief in the first place. The next few weeks were a blur of repairs and long nights. I slept on a cot in the storage room, waking up to the smell of smoke that no scrubbing could erase. We sanded walls, replaced ovens, and repainted ceilings. Ryan refused to take a paycheck. "You pay me when this place breathes again," he said. I never forgot that. When the city inspector came back, he said, "You sure you want to reopen this soon?" I smiled. "Have you ever seen something die twice?" He didn't answer, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. By December, the doors of Cedar and Thyme opened again. The smell of paint mixed with cinnamon. The regulars came back one by one like they'd just been waiting for me to return. That first night, as the last table left, Ryan leaned against the counter and said, "You realize you've done more rebuilding than most people do in a lifetime." I looked around the restaurant. The flicker of candles, the hum of quiet conversation still lingering in the air. "I didn't rebuild," I said. "I started over." He knocked the lip of his coffee mug, still full of our cheap red wine, against mine. "To start over. To survive the fire," I added. We clinked, and for the first time in months I felt something close to peace. But peace doesn't last. Not in my world. 2 days before Christmas, my father showed up at the restaurant unannounced. He stood by the door, surveying everything like he was inspecting a construction site. "The place looks better," he said. "It's new," I replied. He nodded, hands tucked into his jacket. "You're still paying that loan?" "Yes." "Maybe I can help?" He offered, his voice carefully neutral. "I've got some savings. I could invest. You'd have to change a few things, of course, make it more mainstream. Brunches, mimosas, the usual." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You want to invest so you can control it." He didn't deny it. "You could use direction, Claire. You always could." "I already have direction," I said, stepping closer. "It just doesn't point toward you anymore." He stared at me, a flash of something, pride, anger, maybe both, crossing his face. "You sound just like your mother." I take that as a compliment. He left without saying goodbye. After he was gone, Ryan came out from the back, wiping his hands. "That went well," he said dryly. I laughed, the tension breaking. "I think that's the first time he's offered to help me just so he could take credit. Sounds like progress," Ryan said. That night I stayed after closing again. The only light came from the rebuilt oven pilot, a tiny, steady blue eye in the dark. Outside, the snow was thick, muffling the city. I baked another apple pie, the same recipe as the first one, and as it cooled, I thought about the fire. Not the one that burned the kitchen, but the one that had always burned in me. The one my father mistook for arrogance. The one that made me keep going when everything said I shouldn't. When the timer dinged, I pulled the pie from the oven and whispered, "You didn't burn me down. You built me up." The smell of apples filled the air again, sweet and strong. I sat at the corner table, the one where the fire had almost reached, and cut the first slice. The crust flaked perfectly under the knife. Outside, the snow kept falling steady and silent. Inside, I took a bite and let the warmth spread through me. The fire had taken part of my kitchen, but it had given me back something I'd forgotten, proof that I could survive anything. And that kind of fire never goes out. By the time spring rolled into Asheville, cedar and thyme no longer smelled like smoke. It smelled like life again: coffee beans, roasting bread, rising rosemary, sizzling in butter. The fire had scarred the kitchen walls, but we painted over them layer by layer until the past faded into something almost beautiful. The crowds came back slowly at first, then all at once. One Friday morning, there was a line out the door before we even flipped the open sign. I remember looking out the front window, watching people huddle under umbrellas in the rain, their breath fogging the glass. Ryan stepped beside me, handing me a fresh apron. "You're trending again," he said. "Local blogger did a follow-up. Called you the comeback queen of Asheville." I laughed, shaking my head. "Comeback queen? That sounds like a B-movie title." "Yeah," he grinned, "but it's selling tickets. We worked like machines that day." The register dinged, non-stop dishes, clattered laughter filled the space. Every table was full, every seat taken by someone who believed in me, even if they didn't know my story. But behind the noise, there was a shadow. Because success doesn't just bring customers, it brings family back to the door. It started with a phone call. Claire. "Hey, it's Evan." I hesitated before answering. "To what do I owe the honor?" "Relax," he said, too cheerful. "I was in town for meetings. Thought I'd stop by your little place. Dad's been bragging about it lately." "Dad's been bragging," I repeated, half laughing. "About me," "Well," Evan corrected. "He's been telling people he knows the owner." "Technically true, right?" A familiar weariness settled in the back of my throat. "Evan, don't worry, I didn't correct him," he said quickly. "Didn't want to make it awkward." Of course he didn't. Awkwardness was my department. He showed up that afternoon wearing a navy suit. The cufflinks too bright, the kind of suit that still smelled faintly of the department store tag. He hugged me like we were old friends instead of siblings who hadn't spoken in months. "Wow," he said, glancing around. "This place actually looks legit. I mean, I knew you had something going, but this is impressive." "Thanks," I said, keeping my tone even. He leaned on the counter, lowering his voice. "Listen, Dad's been talking to a few investors. They're expanding a restaurant chain in Charlotte. I mentioned your place and they're curious. You should meet them." I folded my arms. "You want me to franchise Cedar and Thyme?" He grinned. "Why not? You'd make real money. None of this one-location hometown charm stuff. We're talking about the big leagues." I stared at him for a long moment. "Evan, this place isn't just a brand. It's my life." He shrugged. "So make it bigger." He didn't understand. He never had. Ryan appeared behind me, sensing the shift. "We're full for the next few weeks," he said to Evan. "If you're planning something, you'll need to get in line like everyone else." Evan laughed, pretending it was a joke. "Don't worry, I won't get in the way. Just trying to help." When he left, Ryan looked at me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, but my voice didn't sound convincing. That night, I sat in my office going over numbers. The restaurant was finally profitable. For the first time, I could breathe. And yet part of me knew it wouldn't matter to my father or brother. To them, success wasn't about building, it was about being seen. 2 days later, I got the message that made everything clear. It was a screenshot from one of my regulars, a woman named June. The message read, "Is this your brother? He's on LinkedIn talking about running a successful restaurant brand with his family. Says he's expanding to Charlotte soon. Just wanted to ask before I comment." There it was, under Evan's name, Co-owner, Cedar and Thyme Restaurant Group. I stared at the screen, the image of his self-appointed title burning itself onto my retina. Co-owner. The audacity was cold, clean, and stunning. Ryan found me 10 minutes later sitting in the dark office, the glow of the monitor painting my face. He's claiming ownership now. I nodded. Apparently we're partners. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. You want me to call him? No, I said. Let him talk. Claire, I looked up at him. Let him talk, Ryan. Because the louder he gets, the easier it'll be when the truth comes out. We didn't say anything else after that. The restaurant was quiet, only the hum of the fridge filling the air. Later that week, another blogger came in, a bigger one this time. Her article went viral overnight. The headline read, "From Fire to Fame, the woman who built Asheville's favorite table." The next morning, the restaurant phone didn't stop ringing. Reservations, interviews, investors. I should have been thrilled. Instead, I felt the unease of knowing who else might be reading it. Sure enough, my father called that evening. Claire, he said, his tone different, lighter, almost proud. Your brother showed me that article. Impressive. You've made quite a name for our family. Our family? I repeated quietly. He didn't catch the edge in my voice. You know, if you'd just listened to me years ago, you could have avoided a lot of struggle. But I suppose it builds character. Anyway, Evan's talking about bringing everyone here for Thanksgiving dinner. Says he knows the owner personally. I swallowed the bitter laugh that rose in my throat. Yeah, I said softly. He does. When the call ended, I stood alone in the dining room. The lights were dim, the chairs neatly stacked. Through the front windows, I could see my reflection, calm, steady, a woman who'd built something real. And I thought about what my father had just said. You've made quite a name for our family. No. I'd made a name for myself. The world outside was dark, but inside the light from the kitchen spilled across the floor, soft, golden, unshaken. That's when I realized something. The fire hadn't destroyed me. It had made me visible, and soon my family would have to see me too. The first chill of November swept through Asheville, like a quiet warning. The trees lining the streets had gone bare, their leaves curled up and dry along the sidewalks. Inside Cedar and Thyme, the warmth of roasted garlic and apple butter filled the air, the kind of scent that wrapped around people like a blanket. It was the start of the holiday season, our busiest time of year. I should have been happy. The restaurant was thriving, the reservation book packed. But something inside me still felt hollow. Every year around this time, I found myself waiting for something that never came. A call, a text, a genuine invitation home. This year I decided not to wait. One slow Monday morning, I sat in my office staring at a blank email draft addressed to Martin Sutton, my father. I typed, deleted, retyped. Finally I wrote, "Hi, Dad. Thanksgiving's coming up and I'd love to host dinner here at the restaurant. You, Mom, Evan, everyone. My treat." I hesitated, then added, "It would mean a lot to me." I read it twice, hit send, and waited. A day passed, then another. The inbox remained empty, a white, mocking space. The silence wasn't just a lack of sound, it was a heavy, definite answer. Ryan noticed my distraction as we prepped the dinner menu. "You look like you're waiting for a bus that's never coming," he said lightly. I smirked. "Maybe I am. You invited them, didn't you?" I nodded. "Yeah. I thought maybe this year would be different." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then softly, "People don't change overnight, Claire." "I know," I said. "But waiting for their recognition is a debt I'm tired of paying." By Friday, still no response. A week later, I was wiping down tables when Ryan came out from the kitchen, holding a reservation slip. "You might want to see this," he said, handing it to me. I frowned, reading the name printed neatly in black ink, Martin Sutton VIP table for 4. Reservation Wednesday, November 23, 7:00 p.m. My breath caught. "Ryan," I said slowly. "Who took this?" "One of the hosts," he said carefully. "It came through our private booking line." "The VIP table." "The VIP table." I repeated, feeling the words like a stone in my chest. "That's the one by the fireplace." He nodded. "Yeah." The one you built this place around. I laughed softly, though it wasn't from humor. Of course it is. Ryan hesitated. You want me to cancel it? I stared at the paper, the bold letters of my father's name. No, I said finally. Keep it. He blinked. Keep it. Yes, I said. They booked my table, Ryan. Let them have it. I want them to see what important people look like. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped when he saw my face. All right, he said, if that's what you want. That night I paced the apartment, the smell of dried smoke from the fire still faint on my coat. I kept seeing the VIP table empty and waiting. I poured a glass of wine and turned off my phone. The clock ticked past midnight and still I couldn't rest. When dawn came, I was back at the restaurant. The morning was gray quiet, the city still asleep. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and felt the familiar calm settle over me. This was my home now, not the house I grew up in, not the family that had taught me silence. This place, these walls, this smell of coffee and baked apples, this was mine. By noon, Ryan came in holding 2 steaming cups. You didn't go home, did you? No point, I said. He sat across from me, sliding one of the cups over. You really want to go through with this? Yes, I said simply. I don't want revenge, Ryan. I just want them to see me. He nodded slowly. Then let's make it unforgettable. We spent the next few days preparing the Thanksgiving menu. The kitchen buzzed with energy chefs testing sauces, waiters, rehearsing service timing. Every detail mattered. I insisted on it. On the morning of the 23rd, I arrived early before the sun rose. The air outside was biting cold. Inside, the warmth from the ovens spread like sunlight. I set each place at the VIP table myself, polished silverware, fresh flowers, candles that smelled faintly of vanilla and clove. As I placed the final wine glass, Ryan came up beside me. They'll be here in a few hours. I know. You want to hide in the office? Or I smiled. No, I'll be here. They just won't know it. I decided I wouldn't reveal myself that night, not yet. I wanted to see them first, to hear them talk, to understand what they told the world about me. When the clock struck 7, the door opened. I didn't need to look to know it was them. My father's voice filled the room before I even saw his face. See? He boomed proudly. Told you the owner's a friend of mine. Best table in the place. My chest tightened. I turned away from the door, standing behind the service counter, watching through the reflection in the window. My father Martin in his gray wool coat, his tie perfectly straight. My mother smiling that careful smile that never reached her eyes. And Evan, smug confident, already reaching for the wine list. They were escorted to the VIP table. My table. Beautiful place, my mother said, glancing around. Martin puffed his chest. The owner gave us the best seat. Said it was for family. Family, Ryan passed by me, his voice low. You okay? I nodded, though my throat felt tight. They didn't see me then, and they still don't now, I muttered. From across the room, I watched them laugh. Toast eat the food I had designed under the light I had hung beside the fire I had built. And yet none of them saw me. When they left hours later, my father stopped by the bar to compliment the staff. Tell the owner, this place is a masterpiece, he said. Tell him I said thank you. Ryan met my eyes across the counter, then nodded slowly. I'll make sure he hears it. They walked out the door, closing behind them, their laughter fading into the cold night. I stood in the stillness that followed the fire, crackling softly, the smell of apple pie lingering in the air. They had come to my table. They had eaten my food. And tomorrow, I thought they'd find out who the owner really was. The morning after my family's dinner, Asheville woke under a thin layer of frost. The restaurant windows glowed amber from the inside, the scent of coffee and thyme filling the empty space. Ryan was already there when I arrived, the reservation ledger open in front of him. They left a nice review, he said dryly. Not looking up. I raised an eyebrow. A review? He slid his phone toward me. On the screen was a social media post from my brother Evan. Nothing like Thanksgiving dinner at a VIP table, courtesy of the owner himself. Connections matter. I stared at it until the words blurred. He actually wrote that Ryan's jaw tightened. He tagged the restaurant. Of course he did. I sank into the nearest chair, resting my elbows on my knees. They really think I'm invisible, don't they? He closed the ledger, leaning against the counter. You could fix that in one sentence. I could, I said, but I won't. Not yet. He frowned. You want to keep pretending? No, I said quietly. I want them to see the truth on their own. No explanations. No yelling. Just reality. Ryan studied me for a moment, then nodded. So what's the plan? Let them think they've gotten away with it, I said. The louder they brag, the harder it'll hit when the lights turn. He smirked. You're scared when you get calm like that. Good, I said. Maybe it's time they got scared. For the next few days, I worked in silence. Every morning I watched my staff prepare the dining room, the tables gleaming under soft light. The scent of baked apples and sage drifting through the air. I kept my head down, said little, and waited. It didn't take long. On Thursday afternoon, Evan pushed the front door open, stepping inside like he was entering his own boardroom. The click of his expensive shoes on the tile sent a wave of familiar fatigue through my shoulders. He was dressed sharper this time, new suit, new watch, same arrogance. Claire, he said, arms wide like we were old friends. There she is, Asheville's rising star. I wiped my hands on a towel, forcing a polite smile. To what do I owe the honor? Just checking in, he said. Dad couldn't stop talking about Thanksgiving. Said the owner really took care of us. Thought I'd come by, maybe thank him in person. A sudden cold shiver of amusement ran straight down my spine. You're thanking the owner? Yeah, he said, flashing that grin that had always gotten him out of trouble. You know me. I like to show appreciation where it's due. Do you now? He didn't notice the edge in my voice. He was too busy looking around, appraising the restaurant like it was an asset to be measured. Anyway, he continued Dad's thinking about bringing the family back for Christmas dinner. We figured we could reserve the same VIP table. Maybe the owner could give us another deal, family discount. Ryan appeared behind the counter, then drying his hands, his expression unreadable. That table is booked solid through the holidays, he said. No exceptions. I turned to Evan, smiling sweetly. Guess connections don't stretch as far as they used to. He frowned. You're kidding, right? I can talk to the owner myself. I tilted my head. You do that. He hesitated like he was searching for the right response. Then he chuckled, brushing it off. You've really built something here, Claire. Not bad for a small-town cook. The words stung, but I didn't let it show. Thank you, I said evenly. Not bad for someone who started with nothing but a burned-down kitchen and a little pride. He gave a short laugh. You always had a flair for drama. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. No, Evan. Drama is when people pretend to be something they're not. I'm just real. He blinked, unsure whether I was insulting him. I didn't give him the chance to respond. Enjoy your lunch, I said, walking away. Ryan followed me to the kitchen, his voice low. You handled that better than I would have. I'm not done handling it, I said. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone by the window staring at the empty VIP table. I could almost hear their laughter echoing from a few nights before the clinking of glasses, my father's booming voice declaring himself important. Ryan's reflection appeared beside mine. You're sure you want them here again? He asked softly. Yes, I said. But not for the reason they think. He nodded slowly. Then I'll keep the table open. Just like you asked. Good, I said. Let's make sure they get exactly what they asked for. The next morning I received a call from my father. His voice was cheerful, rehearsed. Claire, how's business? It's good, Dad. Really good, I bet he said with a chuckle. Listen, your brother mentioned we might book your place for Christmas Eve. The owner's a friend, right? Maybe he can help us out again. I could hear the smile in his voice, that smug confidence that came from never hearing no. I pressed my thumb hard into the curve of the receiver, anchoring my tone to something light and empty. I'll make sure the owner knows, I said. Perfect, he said. You should join us this time. Bring whoever helps you run things over there. Show them how a real holiday looks. Maybe I will, I said. After I hung up, I stood there for a long time, phone still in hand, the absurdity of it all sinking in. They still didn't know. They had eaten at my table, spoken to my staff, complimented my food, and somehow they still thought I was just the girl behind the counter. I walked back to my small office and closed the door. I picked up a menu, traced the logo I'd sketched 5 years ago. I thought about the first time I held the keys to this place, the sheer panic mixed with absolute pride. I was exhausted by the energy it took to be seen by them, even when they weren't looking. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about protecting the core of myself I'd fought so hard to build. That's when I decided I wouldn't tell them. Not yet. I'd show them. Ryan came in carrying a stack of invoices. "Everything okay?" "Better than okay," I said. "Christmas Eve's about to get interesting." He smirked. "You planning something?" I smiled faintly, watching the flicker of the fireplace in the dining room. Let's just say I murmured, "I'm done being invisible." The clock on the wall ticked softly. Outside, the first snowflakes of December began to fall, melting against the glass before they could settle. Inside the room glowed with quiet anticipation, a stage waiting for the truth to take its place. And I knew deep in my chest that the silence was almost over. Christmas Eve arrived dressed in silver light and quiet snow. Asheville was dressed in silver light and quiet snow. But inside Cedar and Thyme, the air was taut, humming with the contained energy of a stage before the curtains rose. The air was alive, clinking glasses, soft jazz, the flicker of candlelight dancing across the polished stone tables. I stood near the bar, not in my usual uniform, but in a black silk blouse and tailored slacks. Tonight I wasn't the chef or the manager. I was just the owner, the woman they didn't know existed. Ryan approached, his sleeves rolled up, his voice low. "They called. Running 10 minutes late." "Of course they are," I said. "Important people always make an entrance." He gave me a look, part amusement, part concern. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I smiled, calm and certain. No yelling, no scenes, just the truth. When the door opened, the air shifted. My father walked in first, his coat draped over his arm like it belonged on a magazine cover. My mother followed, wrapped in red perfume trailing behind her. Evan came last, his grin too wide, holding a wrapped bottle of wine like it was his golden ticket. "Ah, that's my favorite place," my father boomed. "Same table as last time." The host, well-trained and perfectly polite, nodded. "Yes, sir. Right this way." Ryan and I watched from across the room. He murmured, "They really think they own the place." I folded my arms. They're about to learn what ownership looks like. At the table, Evan was already talking too loudly. "Dad, you wouldn't believe how many people asked me about this place. I told them connections matter. You've just got to know the right people." "Smart man," my father said, pouring himself wine. "We built this city on connections." I walked past their table once, pretending to check another reservation. Evan barely noticed. My father glanced at me, but didn't seem to recognize me at all. He gave me the kind of polite half-smile he reserved for staff. That was fine. Ryan approached their table as their server. His professionalism was flawless. "Good evening, Mr. Sutton," he said smoothly. "The owner sends his regards. We hope everything is to your liking." My father preened. "Tell him we appreciate the special treatment. He always takes care of us." "Of course," Ryan said with a slight bow, then met my eyes from across the room. I nodded once. As the night went on, I watched from the bar. They laughed, they toasted, they bragged. My mother took photos for social media. Evan tagged the restaurant again, family dinner, VIP best connections. Every post was another lie wrapped in wine and candlelight. Halfway through their meal, a familiar face entered the restaurant, David Miller, the local food critic who'd helped my business rise from the ashes years ago. He waved when he saw me. I motioned him over quietly. "David," I said, lowering my voice. "Do me a favor. Anything for you," he said, grinning. "Are you planning another headline moment?" "Something like that." "Sit near the fireplace. Table C2. Keep your camera ready." He glanced toward the Sutton family, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Ah," he murmured. "So that's how it is." "Exactly," I said. "But keep it subtle." 10 minutes later, the stage was set. The staff gathered at the edge of the dining room. Ryan stood near the bar, hands folded behind his back, calm but alert. The servers moved like clockwork, clearing the Suttons' plates and refilling their glasses. Then, with perfect timing, Ryan approached their table once more. "Mr. Sutton," he said evenly, "the owner would like to stop by to personally thank you for your continued support." My father smiled broadly. Finally been meaning to shake his hand again. Ryan nodded. "Of course." Ryan nodded. As he turned, I took a deep, centering breath. The music seemed to recede the laughter around them, turning into a low, anticipatory drone. I walked toward them. Each step echoed against the tile floor. My heart was steady, not racing, not trembling. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. When I reached the table, my father looked up, puzzled. My mother blinked. Evan's grin faltered. "Good evening," I said, voice smooth, clear. "I hope everything has been to your satisfaction." My father frowned slightly. "We've been well taken care of, young lady. But we were expecting the owner." I smiled. "You are." Silence. My mother blinked twice, unsure whether she'd misheard. Evan let out a short laugh as if it were a joke. "Wait, you're the owner?" "Yes," I said simply. "Claire Sutton, owner of Cedar and Thyme. The same table you called VIP, the same restaurant you claimed your connections arranged." The color didn't just drain from my father's face. It receded from his neck and up into his hairline, leaving his skin the chalky white of old parchment. He started, his voice faltering. "You own this place?" "For 5 years now," I said. "Since the fire. Since everyone told me to give up. Since you stopped calling." Around us, the dining room was silent. Even the waiters stood still, eyes wide, pretending to focus on anything but the scene unfolding. Evan tried to recover. "Hey, Claire, you didn't tell us." "We could have helped. I cut in softly but sharp. "You claimed ownership. You told people you knew the owner, that you built something here. I didn't correct you because I wanted to see how far you'd go." My father cleared his throat, regaining a sliver of composure. "Now, Claire, there's no need to make a scene. We're family." "Family," I repeated the word, bitter on my tongue. "Family doesn't take credit for someone else's work. Family doesn't pretend you don't exist until there's something to gain." The silence deepened. David Miller from his nearby table quietly snapped a photo. The Suttons frozen under the warm glow of the chandelier, their lies unraveling under the truth. My mother reached for her napkin, but her grip was too tight. She only managed to crush the starched linen in her hand. "We didn't know," I said. "You didn't care." I took a breath, letting the stillness stretch. Then I turned to Ryan. "Make sure the Sutton family's tab is fully covered. Consider it a gift from the owner." He nodded, his expression unreadable. As I turned to leave, my father stood abruptly. "Claire, wait." I paused, not looking back. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice tight, rehearsed. "You've done well." I looked over my shoulder, meeting his eyes for the first time that night. "You're proud of the owner," I said quietly. "Not your daughter." Then I walked away. Behind me, their table sat silent, the air thick with the kind of truth that can't be ignored. At the bar, Ryan set a glass of bourbon in front of me. "You okay?" I exhaled, slow and steady. "Better than I've been in years." From across the room, the firelight reflected off the polished table, where my family once sat laughing, unaware that the woman they dismissed had built the very place they bragged about. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt free. The morning after the dinner, I woke before sunrise, the city still quiet under a thin frost. My apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon and smoke, like the ghosts of last night had followed me home. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the radiator, trying to decide if what I'd done had brought me peace or just a new kind of ache. When I finally got up, my phone was buzzing, text after text, all from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some were old friends from school, others distant relatives. "Saw that post about your family dinner." "Wow, good for you. You really owned that moment literally. Your dad looked like he'd swallowed a lemon." I scrolled past them, numb. David Miller's photo had gone viral overnight. The caption was simple, but devastating. "The truth always comes out, even at Christmas dinner." By the time I got to the restaurant, the news had spread. Ryan was already behind the bar, the scent of his fresh coffee, a sharp contrast to the stale air. He didn't look up, but his suppressed laugh was a low, steady rhythm against the counter. "Morning, boss," he said. "You broke the internet." I groaned. "Please tell me that's an exaggeration." He turned his phone around dozens of articles, blog posts, and local gossip pages. Asheville restaurateur confronts family at holiday dinner. Daughter turns. Tables on arrogant father. David Miller's photo's been shared 10,000 times, Ryan said. Even the local radio mentioned it. I dropped onto a stool, resting my head against the cool wood of the counter. "I didn't want to be a headline," I muttered, the exhaustion heavy on my eyelids. He raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because I saw the way you walked out of that dining room last night. You looked 10 feet tall." I sighed. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted the truth to stop feeling like a secret. Ryan leaned on the counter softer now. "And it did. You've earned that." Still, I couldn't shake the weight pressing on my chest. I hadn't just embarrassed them, I'd exposed them. And no matter how deserved it was, part of me wondered if it had cost something I couldn't get back. Around noon, the phone rang. Ryan reached for it, but I held up a hand. "I've got it." I pressed the receiver to my ear. "Cedar and Thyme, this is Claire." The voice on the other end was low, careful. "Claire, it's me." I closed my eyes. "Dad." A long pause filled the line, broken only by the faint hum of static. "You really humiliated us last night," he said finally. I gripped the edge of the counter. "I didn't humiliate you, Dad. I told the truth. You could have done that privately, like how you privately told people you knew the owner, or privately let everyone think I was still working for someone else." He exhaled heavily. "You've always been dramatic." "Dramatic," I repeated, my voice rising before I forced it steady again. "I spent years cleaning floors, taking loans, missing birthdays, while you told people I was figuring things out. You couldn't even be proud without turning it into a story about yourself." He was quiet for a long moment. Then softly, "You're wrong about me." "No," I said. "I'm just not scared of you anymore." I hung up before he could respond. Ryan looked at me from across the room. That was him, wasn't it? "Yeah." "You okay?" I nodded, though my hands were trembling. "For the first time, I think I am." That evening, the restaurant filled again, customers who had seen the photo, locals who wanted to eat where the story happened. Some congratulated me. Others just smiled, knowingly. It felt strange being seen not for my food, but for my defiance. Halfway through dinner service, a woman approached the bar. She looked familiar, elegant mid-50s, her dark hair pulled back in a neat twist. "Claire Sutton?" she asked. "Yes," I said, uncertain. She smiled faintly. "I'm Rebecca Lang. I used to work with your father a long time ago. I just wanted to say I read the story, and it was about time someone stood up to him." I blinked. "You knew him from work," she nodded. "I did. He's always been the kind of man who thought his name opened doors. Seeing your name on that sign out front, that's poetic justice." She slid a business card across the counter. "If you ever want to expand, call me. People like investing in authenticity." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I smiled, a small but genuine one. "Thank you." After she left, Ryan whistled. "You realize that was the CEO of Lang Hospitality Group, right?" I blinked. "What?" He nodded, grinning. "I guess Dad's connections finally worked, just not for him." I laughed, shaking my head. But later, when the restaurant emptied and the lights dimmed, the laughter faded into something quieter. I stood at the window watching the snowfall blur the streetlights. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible, but visibility came with its own kind of loneliness. Ryan moved to stand near the window, not quite beside me, but close enough that the soft glow from the street caught both our profiles in the glass. He didn't need to ask what I was thinking. I nodded. "He'll never see me the way I want him to." "Then stop wanting that," Ryan said gently. "Start seeing yourself instead." I turned to him, the weight in my chest easing a little. "You always know what to say, don't you?" "Only when it's true," he said with a shrug. We locked up together that night. As I turned the final key, the neon sign outside flickered to life, Cedar and Time, owned by Claire Sutton. For years I'd been waiting for someone else to tell me I was enough. My father never would. My family never could. But standing there under the soft hum of that sign, the snow catching in my hair, I realized I didn't need them to. I whispered to the cold air, I'm not their secret anymore. And this time, the silence that followed didn't feel heavy. It felt like freedom. The first week of January came with a vacant, biting cold. Asheville felt stripped bare, the air thin and metallic where the holiday warmth had been. The restaurant had never been busier. The viral story had brought new customers from all over the state, people who wanted to eat where the confrontation happened. Some came for the food. Some came for the gossip. Either way, the tables stayed full. But even success couldn't drown out the phone calls. My father had called again. Twice. I hadn't answered. Ryan walked in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. You're doing it again, he said. Doing what? Staring out the window like you're watching the snow erase all the old names. I smiled faintly. Maybe I am. He leaned against the counter. If that ghost has a name that starts with M, you should stop giving him rent in your head. He's had enough space already. I took a slow sip of coffee. Ryan's voice softened. You're not wrong, Claire. You just outgrew his world. I didn't answer. Outside, the snow had become a faint, insistent drizzle, etching blurred lines onto the glass. A few hours later, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I ignored it. Then Ryan's desk phone rang. He picked it up, listened, then looked at me. It's him, he said quietly. I exhaled slowly. Put him through. He nodded, pressing the line. Hello, I said, my voice even. Claire, my father said. His tone was lower this time, not the booming confidence I'd grown up with, but something tighter, slower. We need to talk. I think we said enough at Christmas. Maybe you did. I didn't. I leaned against the counter. You never really did you? He ignored that. Look, things have changed. After what happened, people started talking. Clients pulled back. The firm's reputation took a hit. I almost laughed. And here I was, thinking you called to apologize. His voice sharpened. Don't be childish. You embarrassed this family. You humiliated your brother. I humiliated him, I said, incredulous. He lied, Dad. You all did. I just stopped pretending. There was a long silence on the line. Then softer. Maybe we both made mistakes. I hesitated. The words almost sounded human. Maybe I said carefully. But I spent years cleaning up mine. What are you doing about yours? He sighed, the kind of heavy, frustrated breath that used to end every argument between us. You're still my daughter, Claire. That hasn't changed, hasn't it? Another pause. I want to come by, he said finally. Talk in person. Why? Because I want to make things right. Something in his voice didn't sound like him, not the arrogance, not the certainty. It was thinner, almost weary. Against my better judgment, I said, tomorrow, noon. But if this is about saving face, it's not. He interrupted. It's about something else. The line went dead. Ryan raised an eyebrow. You're actually letting him in here? I nodded slowly. Tomorrow. Do you trust him? No, I said. But I want to hear what lie he tells me next. The next day, I arrived early. The air outside was sharp, the kind that made your breath visible in small bursts. I opened the blinds, set the chairs straight, wiped down the tables, anything to keep my hands busy. At exactly noon, the door opened. My father stepped inside. Older somehow, the swagger gone. He wore a heavy coat, but his face looked pale tired. Still a beautiful place, he said, glancing around. Still mine, I replied. He gave a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. You always did know how to make a point. Why are you here, Dad? He hesitated before sitting at one of the tables. Because I finally saw it. I frowned, saw what it takes to build something real. What I never did. He looked down at his hands. You were right about me. I used people, I took credit for things I didn't earn. I thought power was the same as respect. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure I believed him. He went on, his voice low. When that story came out, my phone stopped ringing. Partners pulled deals. The bank called. I lost everything I built. I blinked. You're saying this because you want my sympathy? He shook his head. No. I'm saying it because I realized something when I saw that picture. The one with you standing there calm as ice while the whole room stared at me. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't fight dirty. You didn't need to. You had already won. I stared at him, unsure what to feel, pity, anger, maybe both. He looked up. I came to say I'm sorry. Not for losing my job or the firm or the friends. I'm sorry I never told you I was proud of you before the world did. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I searched his face for the man I used to need, but all I saw was someone small, human, and finally honest. I don't know what to say, I whispered. Then don't, he said. Just know that I see you now. He stood, his hand brushing the back of the chair. That's all I came to do. I followed him to the door, my chest tight. Dad, I said softly. He turned, waiting. Seeing me now doesn't erase how invisible you made me before. He nodded. I know. Then he left. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, my reflection faint in the glass. Ryan walked out from the kitchen, drying his hands, so I swallowed hard. He apologized. Ryan blinked. Wow. Didn't see that coming. Neither did I. He leaned on the counter. You okay? I nodded slowly. I think I am. For real this time. That evening after closing, I turned off the lights and sat alone at the VIP table. The same table where my family once laughed at me. The same table where I stood tall and told the truth. Now it was quiet, peaceful even. I ran my fingers along the polished surface, then whispered to the empty room, You see me now. That's enough. Outside, the snow began again, soft, slow, unhurried. The world, it seemed, had finally caught up with me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like proving anything to anyone. Not to my father, not to the world, not even to myself. Just enough. The envelope came on a Wednesday morning, thick, white, and formal, slipped under the restaurant door before I arrived. The snow outside hadn't melted yet. The tracks leading up to the entrance were fresh. I bent down, picked it up, and felt the weight of something more than paper. My name was written across the front in my father's handwriting. The white envelope was thick, a silent contradiction against the sharp metallic hiss of the espresso machine behind me. Ryan looked up from the counter. What's that trouble? I said quietly. He frowned. From him I nodded, tearing it open. Inside was a folded letter and a smaller envelope sealed with gold wax. I unfolded the first page. Claire, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to say everything in person. You deserve more than half an apology spoken over the smell of coffee. You deserve the truth. The weight of the letter felt like a cold stone in my palm as my eyes scanned the page. When I lost the firm, I realized how fragile everything I built really was. It was made of paper contracts, promises, handshakes, nothing that could last. What you built, though, that's real. You created something people can touch, taste, remember. You built something that carries your name. I used to think legacy was money or recognition. You showed me it's something else. The words blurred for a second. I blinked hard, forcing the letters back into focus. I've left you something. It's not much compared to what I took from you, but it's what I have left. The enclosed envelope holds the deed to your grandparents' old property by Lake Juniper. They left it to me years ago and I never told you. You were too young then, too eager to leave this family behind. I think they would have wanted it to be yours. Do with it what you will. Sell it, keep it, burn it. But if you ever go there, you'll see what they saw. The land, the quiet, the view that made them believe in second chances. Maybe it'll remind you of where you came from, even if you had to rebuild it all on your own. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope someday you'll remember me not for the man who dismissed you, but for the father who finally understood. Dad. I refolded the letter carefully, my fingers leaving slight damp indentations on the heavy paper. Ryan watched me, unsure whether to speak. "You okay?" I exhaled slowly. He gave me the lake house. The one he never talked about. I nodded. It was my grandparents'. I haven't been there since I was a kid. He leaned forward. "Are you gonna go?" "I think I have to." The drive to Lake Juniper took 3 hours. The road wound through bare trees past frozen creeks and quiet cabins. When I arrived, the air smelled clean and sharp, untouched by city life. The cabin stood small but solid, weathered wood ivy creeping up one side, the porch dusted with snow. I pushed open the door. The latch scraped metal on wood, the sharp sound echoing in the stillness. Inside, the air was cold but familiar. Dust floated in the light, slicing through the windows. The furniture was old, but cared for: a kitchen table, a worn couch, shelves lined with faded photographs. One of them stopped me. It was my grandmother smiling in front of a pie she'd baked, her apron covered in flour. My grandfather stood behind her, holding a coffee mug, grinning. And in the corner, a tiny version of me, no older than 8, holding a wooden spoon like it was a sword. The smell of baked apples filled my memory so vividly it almost hurt. I sat at the table, the letter still folded in my hand. For the first time since Christmas, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel sadness. Just a quiet, steady understanding. He hadn't left me an apology. He'd left me a chance to decide what came next. By the time the sun set, I'd built a fire in the old stone hearth. The warmth spread slowly, pushing back the cold. I poured a cup of coffee from the thermos I'd brought, staring at the flames. Ryan called a few hours later. "Are you alive out there?" "Barely," I said, smiling. "The place looks like it hasn't changed since 1980. But it's peaceful." He hesitated. "So what now?" I looked around the cabin, the photos, the empty walls, the potential. "Maybe I'll restore it," I said. "Turn it into something small. A bakery, maybe? A place where people can sit by the lake and eat pie." He laughed softly. "You'd call it what, time by the water?" I chuckled. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll call it second chances." There was a pause, and then Ryan said quietly, "You know, he might have actually meant it, the apology." I didn't answer right away. The fire crackled, the wind brushing against the window pane. "Maybe," I said finally. "But this means more. He gave me something I can build from. That's the closest thing to forgiveness I'll ever need." We hung up, and I sat there for a long while, listening to the lake outside. It was still half frozen, the surface catching the moonlight like glass. Before I left, I walked to the porch, the snow crunching beneath my boots. I could almost hear my grandmother's laughter, my grandfather humming an old tune. I whispered into the cold air, "I made it, Grandma. I kept it alive." The words drifted into the wind, carried somewhere I couldn't see. As I drove back toward Asheville, the letter sat on the passenger seat beside me, the gold seal broken, the deed tucked safely inside. When I returned to the restaurant that night, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The warmth of the kitchen greeted me like an old friend. The smell of baked apples lingered from earlier that day, faint but familiar. I set the letter down on my office desk, staring at it for a long moment before switching off the light. That cabin wasn't just a piece of land. It was a bridge, not back to the family I'd lost, but forward to the life I was still building. And for the first time, the idea of legacy didn't scare me. It felt like home waiting to be reborn. The next Thanksgiving came quietly, like a page turning without a sound. The city was washed in orange and gold, the air thick with the scent of roasted apples and cinnamon from every corner bakery. Cedar and thyme was fuller than ever, the tables glowing beneath the soft light of candles, laughter floating through the air like music. I stood near the bar, dressed in my usual black apron, not as the woman proving herself anymore, just as the owner, steady and sure. Ryan leaned against the counter beside me, wiping his hands on a towel. "You realize it's been a year, right?" he said. "A year after what I asked, though I already knew." He smirked. "Since your dad told you the owner gave him the VIP table." I laughed softly, the sound surprising even me. Feels like a lifetime ago. He handed me a glass of cider. You ever think about what would have happened if you'd never told them the truth? I looked out across the dining room at families, leaning close at strangers sharing pie, at a little girl pressing her face to the window to watch the snow. I'd still be invisible, I said. And worse than that, I'd still believe I deserved to be. Ryan nodded slowly. You've come a long way, Claire. So have we, I said, smiling. We built something that lasts. The door swung open, the bells above jingling loud, and a shock of bright, crisp air swept across the polished floor. Among the customers shaking snow from their coats was someone I hadn't expected to see. My mother, Linda. She looked older, not in the way years make you old, but in the way regret does. Her hair was shorter, her coat plain. When her eyes met mine, I saw a flicker of something that wasn't arrogance or pity. It was hesitant. Claire, she said softly. Linda, I didn't mean to intrude. I just wanted to see the place. I studied her face for a moment. You came alone, she nodded. Your father's not doing well. His health's been declining. He talks about you a lot. I felt something settle in my stomach, a quiet sense of recognition. The regret in her eyes was palpable. Is he still at the old house? She shook her head. He sold it. Moved closer to the coast. Quieter there. I think he's finally learning to live small. There was an awkward silence filled only by the clinking of glasses and the hum of the oven in the kitchen. She looked around, taking in the restaurant. It's beautiful. Warm. He would have been proud if he could have seen it this way. He did, I said softly. Once, before he left. Her lips pressed together, the corners trembling. He didn't know how to love you the way you needed Claire. Some people never learn until it's too late. I didn't know what to say to that, so I simply nodded. Would you like a seat? She smiled faintly. No, thank you. I just wanted to tell you he asked me to give you something. She pulled a small envelope from her purse and placed it on the counter. He said you'd know when to open it. I took it, my fingers brushing hers. Thank you. She gave one last nod, then turned toward the door. When she stepped outside, the snow caught in her hair, glittering under the lights. Before she disappeared into the crowd, Ryan appeared at my side. That was her, wasn't it? Yeah. You gonna open it? Not yet. We finished the night in a quiet rhythm, the sound of plates' laughter, the low hum of contentment that fills a restaurant when everyone inside feels exactly where they should be. After the last table left, I locked the front door and sat at my favorite corner booth, the one by the window overlooking the street. The envelope sat on the table in front of me. I hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Claire. If this reaches you, it means I couldn't say goodbye to myself. I want you to know that the lake house, the one I gave you, was the last piece of this family that still held good memories for me. It's where your mother used to sit and read by the window, where you learned to bake with your grandmother, where we still believed in each other. You brought that belief back, not just for me, but for everyone who ever doubted you. You took something broken and made it whole again. That's what love is, even when we fail at showing it. There's an old key under the porch steps. It opens a chest in the cabin's back room. It's yours. I never opened it after your grandparents passed. Maybe it was waiting for you. I'm proud of you, Claire. Always have been, just too foolish to say it. Love, Dad. The words blurred as I read, but the warmth that spread through me wasn't grief. It was crisp, sharp, and seasoned. Ryan found me still sitting there, the paper trembling in my hands. You okay? I nodded, my throat tight. Yeah. For the first time, I think I am. He didn't ask anything else, just placed a warm hand on my shoulder for a moment before turning back to the bar. A week later, I drove back to Lake Juniper. The air was cold and clear, the water smooth like glass. I found the key under the porch, just where he said it would be. The chest in the back room was small cedar, and when I touched it, the wood felt cool and smelled faintly of old linen and pine sap. Inside were recipes written in my grandmother's looping cursive, a faded photograph of my parents on their wedding day, and a notebook my mother's filled with plans for a bakery she'd wanted to open but never did. At the very back was a single slip of paper with my name written across it in her handwriting, for when you finally find your way home. I pressed the note to my chest, my breath catching. That night I sat by the fire, the same one I'd lit months before, and wrote in my own notebook ideas, sketches, names. At the top I wrote the title that came without hesitation, Second Chances by the Lake. The next morning I drove back to Asheville, my heart lighter than it had been in years. The restaurant glowed as I approached its windows, bright against the cold morning. Ryan was outside, hanging a small holiday wreath on the door. He turned and grinned. "You look different. I feel different. You found what you needed." I smiled, looking up at the sign, Cedar and Thyme. "Yeah," I said. It turns out I was already there. That evening I made a new apple pie, the same recipe my grandmother had written, the same smell that had followed me my whole life. When I sliced it open, the steam rose like a memory. I plated one piece, set it at the corner booth, and whispered, "For you, Mom. For all of us." Then I sat across from it, hands folded, watching the candlelight flicker in the glass. Behind me, Cedar and Thyme pulsed with a low, steady energy, the sound of my future being built one conversation at a time. I had my own family now, the people who believed, who stayed, who built something real beside me. And as I looked around, I realized Thanksgiving wasn't about who sat at your table. It was about who stayed when the plates were empty. You don't have to prove your worth to the people who refuse to see it. Just build your own table. And when they finally ask for a seat, smile and let them taste what